We are hardwired to eat. And so having a barrier to that thing that is hardwired within us is, I don't think people quite fully understand without being immersed in it, what psychological and physical effects that have on people.
That was Jules Chared, someone whose work and insights you don't want to miss.
I'm based in Duncan, BC, and I work as a photographer, a writer, a journalist, an outspoken advocate for disability and trans rights. I'm an official contributor to Getty's Images. I'm a staff writer for F-Stoppers. I'm an instructor of professional photographers looking to expand their skills. And I am an accredited food photographer with the Professional Photographers of Canada.
Chared has 2 different projects that all work in concert around food and disability. He's in the process of creating a photography and video exhibition to raise awareness to the barriers disabled people face in accessing food. It will be called the Cowichan Valley Disability, Culture, and Food Through Art exhibit. The exhibition will showcase the food-related stories of disabled and racialized Canadians and local food and beverage producers. He is also the author of the Disabled Kitchen and Garden website that focuses on making cooking and gardening easier for people with a variety of disabilities. Today, Jules Chared will be sharing his insight on food security for those with disabilities and the meaning and purpose behind his art and website, as well as his own lived experience with his disabilities. Welcome to Growing Together, a podcast that covers a range of topics on food, food security, and disability. I am Maya Nelson-Roundtree, your host, and this podcast is brought to you by the Disabled Independent Gardeners Association. Before starting, we would like to acknowledge that we are calling in today from the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. I hope you enjoy today's episode of Growing Together. So in learning about your website, the Disabled Kitchen and Garden, you stated your frustration with recipe reviews that never mentioned the benefits for people with disabilities and kitchen and gardening tips for people with disabilities that were written by able-bodied people. What are some examples that you've come across?
Well, I think when it comes to the cooking side, it comes with appliances that are really, really disability friendly and help with accessing the kitchen for disabled people. And the first big one would have to be the Instapot, because all of my able-bodied friends, they would get an Instapot and then would complain about it ad nauseum. And then I saw somebody who is disabled, a YouTube video, and they were talking about how cooking now is so much easier for them with their rheumatoid arthritis. I'm like, why has nobody ever talking about this before? Like, why isn't the Instapot sold as a disability device? And why aren't people talking about those benefits? So I got one, and it completely revolutionized my life. I was able to start cooking again and enjoying the meal prep and just the whole process, because I come from a rich food culture background, and there was years where I couldn't cook, and it was like part of my soul was missing. And the other big thing when it comes to food and preparation is recipes never have realistic prep times, because it takes like a disabled person anywhere from twice to 4 times as long to prep. And so like anytime I see a recipe that's like 15 minutes prep, I'm like, oh, so I'm going to be here for like 45 minutes. So like there's no easy recipes, right? And then a lot of times when I say this recipe is super easy, and then I read it and I'm like, I don't have 2 hours. Like, how is 2 hours a super easy recipe? Like, my spoons will be gone for a week. So that's on the food side. And then on the gardening side, there's just there's like things like raised beds and planks on the ground, like plywood for wheelchair accessibility. But even raised beds and like, sure, it's great that I can access a bed in my wheelchair. However, my hands are not capable of doing actual dirt gardening. I have sun allergy, so I can't be out in the daylight for a long time. So there's all these things that still, and all these solutions were created by able-bodied people thinking, okay, well, if we just put some planks down or raise garden beds, that will be enough. when it's not for a lot of mobility issues. And nobody also talks about hydroponic gardening. I use aero gardens, but there's lots of different hydroponic gardens on the market, specifically about for use of disability, and just how simple it is, especially like for functioning executive functioning issues, mobility issues, space issues, all that stuff, because you can stick it in a closet and forget it and it's still going to be fine. And again, it was able-bodied people complaining about, well, I can only grow like maybe 3 things at a time. And like, you don't understand how those 3 things, being able to have maybe fresh lettuce and some herbs or whatever, is life altering for somebody who is disabled and can't go to the grocery store just to simply pick up those things. So it saves, like, it's a big investment at the beginning, but in the long run, having your choice of 3 fresh herbs that you use all the time is life changing.
Yeah, this definitely goes to show that your website and all the resources within your website are very much needed with information that is not talked about enough.
Mm-hmm.
And so, with your website and its large focus on Instapotting and aerial gardening, as well as the variety of other tips and tricks within it, in what ways have you seen your website come to light and help people with disabilities with respect to food preparation and food access?
So the biggest feedback is just how they've never thought about using tools that they already have in their kitchen, in like how to reuse it without having the benefit of an occupational therapist to go through that. I had to teach myself how to do these things. So it's having somebody else do it is like just simply how to make cracking a hard-boiled egg easier. Has just changed that one small thing, in air quotes, because it's not actually small. So people keep reaching out, and how their anxiety has gone down since they started to use so both mental health and physical issues. Because I also have like how to help, like how to use the Aero Garden to help with anxiety, especially if you have complex post-traumatic stress. So it's and also just being able to cook again, and being able to actually look at a recipe and trust that when I say it's going to be 10 minutes prep time, they can actually trust, yeah, I have to open up 2 cans, stick it in an Instapot, and then walk away from it. And that's it. My work is done. So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing, is just people are just blown away by how much more enjoyment and spoons they have now for doing things like cooking. Being able to cook again has been the biggest thing, and being able to repurpose things that they already have in their kitchen and rework their prep spaces and all that other stuff so it works for their disability and they're not pushing against it, has been the biggest feedback that I've gotten from it.
Yeah, and on your part, it seems like such a creative process. And it's wonderful to see how something in quotes are deemed as small can make such a huge impact. Yeah, so I would love to now talk about your upcoming art exhibition. Could you tell us about the barriers to food security and food access that you were hoping to shed light on through your exhibition?
So I live in a breadbasket. Despite this, like lots of you can't go anywhere without there being a food producer or a beverage producer or whatever, with all the ingredients grown here. Despite that, 25% of people in the Cowichan Valley still have issues accessing food, especially locally produced food. So like when it comes to access, it's like Thrifty Foods is, well, up until like 2 weeks ago, was the only place that delivered groceries, and now it's Save On Foods. And during the pandemic, when everybody was shopping online, like suddenly it was like you could no longer get grocery delivery because it was like a 2-week wait, and who has 2 weeks? So that's the big thing, is there's not enough ability for people to shop online. And Thrifties is really good about making sure that they have lots of island produce and local produce in it. But even beyond that, there's local producers that have issues even getting their produce into local stores. So people have to go to farmer markets or go to their places of business to get those things. There's one farm here that has, for once a week, you can get a basket of fresh seasonal produce, fresh from their farm. Is organic. It's healthy. It's cheap. It's like $15 a week or something like that for more. The problem is you have to go all the way out to their farm to pick it up. Well, that lots of people who are disabled do not have a means of transportation. The bus does not run there. So, like, a possible solution is, why isn't there a community group that goes out there and like does picking, like shops at the farmer market and local farms and delivers them to disabled people? And then when it comes to visible minorities and racialized Canadians, a big thing that happened, and it got worse during COVID, was when the Gurdwara could no longer feed the community on Saturdays. There was a huge, vacuum where people could no longer enjoy their home cooking, because the places that fed people who have barriers to access, like getting things to make proper Indian food, well, specifically Punjabi food, you either have to drive to Victoria, which is like an hour away, which is impossible, or there's one gas station that is owned by a Punjabi family, that is like on the highway connector between Duncan out to like Cowichan, which is also like inaccessible for a lot of disabled people, where you can get fresh imported stuff from Punjab. A Western diet is not healthy, and it causes a lot of problems in racialized Canadians. So it's that whole, like, it's getting food is difficult enough when you're a white disabled person, but when you're a racialized disabled person, especially if you're a new Canadian, it's like pretty much impossible to eat the foods that are your soul.
Yeah. Yeah. So there's quite a decent amount of information out there regarding food security and disability, but they often come in the form of research papers, articles, and perhaps some documentaries. However, your take on this issue is quite unique in the sense that you're raising awareness through art. Why is it important to raise awareness of these barriers through your art, specifically your photography?
So the very first thing that we do when we are born, if everything is well, is that we eat. We are put to the parent's chest, and we chest feed or breastfeed, whatever the term the person who's doing it prefers to use. And food is visceral. It is ingrained in us, right? Like it's primal. And when you do it via food imagery, like my images, when the major one comments is, "Oh my God, I'm so hungry now," right? So imagine you're surrounded by images and you're hungry, and then you're put in the person's mind as they're experiencing this very immersive experience, that you cannot have any of these things. These things are difficult. To have these things, you have to work. It adds more personalization, it adds more immediacy, it makes it more real. And to hear the voices, to see the people, because there's a video component, right? So it's done in a photojournalistic style as a plan, and I shoot them, like, we talk about favorite dishes and signature dishes that are part of that person's food culture. And we talk about barriers they face, either because they're disabled or they're racialized and the ingredients aren't readily available, or it's a mix of both. And part of it too is I'm going to take whatever recipe they give, and with permission, I'm going to adapt it to make it friendlier for people with disabilities, so they can, once again, not like a lot of problems with a lot of these foods is they take like 3 to 5 hours to make, right? Like it's a full day. Food prep is a full day production. I come from a Ukrainian and Polish background. It is a full day production, especially because you never know when somebody's going to walk in the house and you have to feed them until they burst, because that's just the way it is, right? So there's always, I mean, like, oh my goodness, like one of my favorite dishes, just like a regular chicken curry with rice, like that is a full day production when you're not doing it in the Instapot, because it takes a long time to get it to be soft and have the flavors fully become, like, yeah, it's a lot of work. And so to make it more accessible, and then to have video. And so there's the component of them seeing it, them understand, being like, oh my God, I want this, but I can't have it. So they're understanding it more it's easier for them to empathize that way. And then they also see the person. And so they get to connect the personal story with the food in a way that allows for more emotional connection.
So your exhibition will be both in studio, online, and on an app, if I'm correct?
Yeah.
So I'm sure that many people will have access to this. But with that being said, what audience or audiences do you have in mind when creating your exhibition?
Pretty much everyone. I mean, so like, I don't think people understand or fully, like, they haven't really thought about how integrated the arts are into Canadian culture. I mean, like 90% of Canadians consume art in one way or another, and 50% of us make it. Like, it's not a small number. Um, and so I think like everybody loves food. Everyone loves food images. Everyone would be like, well, that is different. That is new. Let me learn. I mean, disabled people I will have like, there will be, everything will be closed caption for people with who are deaf or have hearing impairments, and there will be described video of things for people who are blind or have visual or are visually impaired. For the in-person, if I get the grant that I'm hoping for to make it more accessible, there will be like RFID tags everywhere. So as soon as you walk with the app up to the exhibit that you want to look at, it will start talking to the person and just fully immerse them into it, so that they don't even have to do much work if they're blind or visually impaired. They just have to walk up to the image, and it starts telling the story, and then so many minutes later it automatically starts telling the video with everything. And so it's obviously for disabled people, but more importantly, it able people need to watch it because they need to be understand, because able people need to be allies, and they need to be the ones who are implementing the solutions that may come up and be present, and not the burden cannot be on disabled people to fix this issue. The burden has to be on the able people to fix this issue. So it's primarily for them to have awareness and fix the issue, and it's for disabled people so they can be seen and heard and feel like, wow, my story is actually being told in a way that is my voice, that is my words, and not somebody co-opting my voice, my words, and rewriting it through an ableist lens.
Yeah, you definitely just touched on this, but could you expand when audience members, both disabled and abled, visit or see your exhibition online? What do you ultimately want them to take away from it?
So I want people to take what they've seen and learn, regardless of where they are in Canada, and start being part of the solution and figure out ways that they can help mitigate this and feel it on a level that really spurs them to action, instead of just, well, that is sad, and then they don't think about it again until until it comes up again in the news, right? Like paying $20 for a liter of orange juice or whatever people have to pay in the north, in the territories, is ridiculous. Like there should be no reason for that. Like why aren't there government grants there to build greenhouses and hydroponic? Like their solutions are there. So we need people to actually be like, this is not equitable. 25% of Canadians should not be facing barriers to food simply because they're disabled. And it's more, if they're racialized, let's actually do something about it, because I could be disabled tomorrow. It's not like yeah, anyone can be, especially after COVID. I think that's something that people have become more cognizant of, is that anybody can get sick and develop a disability at any moment. So let's get on this with some urgency.
Yes, agreed. Yeah, I think your work is going to really be quite eye-opening, and really hopefully it spurs a lot of us into action. So I'm also aware that you're expanding your work through an upcoming cookbook for people with disabilities. And my question is, through all your work that you're doing with regards to this upcoming book, your current social media and web presence, how can allies in the disabled community become involved and support you in your work?
Well, the best way right now is because producing an art exhibit is expensive. They can go to, so if they go to disabilityandfood.art, in the menu, there's a give button. And there's a whole bunch of perks depending on how much you give. It's basically like a Kickstarter, but instead of using Kickstarter where they take so much money, I'm doing it on through my own. So they will get like admission into the exhibit. They will get enhanced program, like a print program. There's also sponsorship opportunities and advertising opportunities if you click on the sponsor link. So that's the number one way that people can help. The other way, because I have a few agents that are currently considering my cookbook proposal. Some publishers like to see like social media following. So, I mean, the other way is to follow me on Twitter at Geeky Jewels. And if I get that number up, then it will be to a publisher like, hey, this is actually needed. And to follow my food photography business on Instagram at Polaris Creative Food.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Jules Shared, an accredited food photographer, a writer, a journalist, and advocate, just spoke to the barriers to food security and food access for those with disabilities and racialized communities. He also spoke to the ways in which his projects are working to overcome these barriers and to ignite us to be part of the solution. Thank you for listening. This podcast was kindly supported by Ingenium, Canada's Museums of Science and Innovation. Stay tuned for more episodes of Growing Together.